I am so incredibly excited to introduce you all to Adele Bates for this first episode of a new podcast series called The Consciousness Shift. I am so excited. Welcome, Adele.
Hello, thank you very much. I did say I would get my ring in that shot, and that introduction was a beautiful moment to
Yes, loving the ring, absolutely loving it. So I have known Adele for it's a couple of years now, actually.
That's a good point. Yes, I hadn't thought about that. Yes, you're right.
It's a couple of years that I've known Adele, and I've known about what she does and how she's doing this incredible work with schools. And this, when I was thinking about this podcast episode, I've been thinking about inviting Adele on for a while, but this consciousness shift that I'm really passionate about, what is possible in life, what is possible in our world. And Adele has this incredible education background, and she's making massive shifts in that area. So I want to start, Adele, by asking you, what is your vision? What is the vision that you are coming from when it comes to your work with schools?
Good place to start. So my vision for education is one in which all differences are welcomed and accepted. It's an education system that is relevant, flexible, and leads to positive social change. And I'm a behaviour and education specialist, keynote speaker and author, and I work across many different types of schools now, and in particular I work with young people with behaviour needs. And so particularly in the British education system, I've also worked in some others, but my main focus is the British one at the moment. Give me a couple of years. But what I see right now are all sorts of young people not getting the education they deserve. And I see a lot of disempowered young people. I see a hell of a lot of disempowered staff with the system that we currently have. And I see a lot of very disadvantaged young people who are not getting an equal access to education as their peers. And so my vision is about us creating, and I love what you're saying, I'm just thinking now about the consciousness, it's like creating an education system that, instead of being a system that was created in the Victorian times, let's remember this, that the education system in Britain is a Victorian machine, and it's worked well for certain times in history. We're not in the Victorian times anymore, and yet the education system is. And guess what? It's not working. So my vision is for us to play with that, readapt it, recreate it, destroy it, rebuild it, so that we have an approach and a system that welcomes all of the differences, no matter what they might be in the young people. And that becomes the fabric, the basis from which we create the learning, rather than this is the system we do, you need to fit in it. If you don't fit in it, we'll perhaps put an intervention on a Tuesday afternoon, and if then you still don't do it, we'll exclude you. For me, that's not inclusion. And that's really at the core of my vision, is this inclusion of all. And I mean really all. I mean even Mo, who's sat on the roof again, even him. That our education system supports all of them.
I love it. And it's so needed, and I think it's what I was about to say, it's what everyone's crying out for, and I think it is. It's what parents are crying out for, it's for what children are crying out for, it's what staff are crying out for.
Big time. Yeah,
it's time for things to change. And I love that you are really at the forefront, actually, of being a voice for this change, and a way shower, of how we can do this. We were just talking before we came on this podcast, and you are such a creative alchemist, you know. So, and it's these creatives, you know, that I know you are, that I know I am, you know, that at the moment, these kind of children, I think, aren't supported in the education system, because actually that kind of creativity isn't being nurtured, you know. They're cutting arts, they're cutting all those things that help us really be who we truly are.
Absolutely. And if,
you know,
if you were feeling particularly, I'd say if you're feeling particularly premenstrual, or your version of that, if you're feeling particularly perhaps pessimistic, you know, is it a coincidence that our education system is cutting off some of our most vital sources in being conscious? So one of the I'm going to tell you a short story about one of the moments that broke my heart and propelled me into doing what I'm doing now. So I was teaching in mainstream school. I'm an English teacher by trade, so this was secondary GCSE class. And paper 2, for those of you who are listening and know this kind of information, paper 2, question 4 of the English exam paper, GCSE, there's a statement, and it will say something like, I don't know, this student thinks blah de blah de blah, and then it will say, to what extent do you agree? I mean, talk about leading question. To what extent do you agree? And then what you have to do with the marking scheme, you have to show that you agree by taking references from the text and proving it and creating this constructive argument. And one of my kids, who would be classed as low level ability because he had memory issues, he said to me, Miss, what if I don't agree? And I stood there, and it was just like my whole being just crashed, because I realized I was being asked to teach something that I didn't believe in. Because the way the marking scheme is created in this question, I'm sure it goes across all the other subjects as well, is that if you want to disagree, you have to be a certain level of English skills, of argumentative, constructive skills and rhetoric, in order to be able to disagree with the exam board. So what it shows in the marking scheme is you can do 4 agreeing points and then maybe 1 or 2 disagreeing points. But if you just did disagreeing points, you wouldn't get any marks. And this kid, unfortunately, because he had low ability, because of the way that the exam question was constructed, my duty as a teacher, I should have said, oh, it's best for you just to agree to get the marks. And I had this little moment where my little mind just blew, because I was reading Wild Swans at the time, which is about how China and Mao's education system was created in order to make compliant people. And I just stood there and thought, oh my goodness, this is kind of happening here. Because what it's saying is you can only disagree with the government with the exam paper. The exam papers are, you know, they come from government. Mr. Gove created these ones. So the only way for you to argue against is if you are of a certain education level. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't say to this kid, you need to agree. I couldn't do it. I mean, I ran the Amnesty International Club at this school. I was not about to say, just agree with the mass, you know. And I think that it doesn't take much to look at the education system to find moments like that. And, you know, whatever you think about it politically or anything like that, what's more important to me is the children. Because what it means is that kid is walking into that exam room and he is at a disadvantage before he's even opened the paper. He's at a disadvantage because of the way that our exams are created, which are very content knowledge heavy, because it's all terminal exams now. There's no coursework, like all sorts of reasons. When you start to unpick the structure, there are so many things that, exactly what you were saying, Sarah, that cut off our consciousness. And then that's not even without talking about the cuts in the arts, the cuts in music, the cuts in all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna have some tea. There's a lot to do.
There is a lot to do. And you know, when you were saying about, you know, the vision that you have, and that equality that's in that, I was just like, oh yes, you know, coming from this education perspective, because my vision is to help create a legacy of feminine social change, so our children can grow up in a world where feminine and masculine qualities are equally respected and valued, and what you look like and all the rest of it has no bearing on your worth. So that is mine, you know, and the work that I do really comes from that driving force. And the reason for me, it's this feminine social change, because I believe we're out of whack, you know, we're out of balance. We've been in this masculine way of doing everything, which is, again, the education system. It's within that, you know, for such a long time, that it needs this rebalance, you know, and the creativity, the arts and all of that are very heavily connected with the feminine.
Yes, and I think what's really challenging is anything that we might describe as feminine. Now, it's interesting because I don't use those words when I'm working in schools, because I know how I will be perceived, especially the fact that I am feminine. And for the job that I do, I'm pretty young. Most people who are behaviour consultants like me are men old enough to be my dad. And some of them are lovely. They're, you know, I kind of like my career uncles. But I'm very noticeably female and young comparatively. And I'm very wary of using any words like that in education, because it is so what I would recognize as patriarchal, that to mention it, people would turn off. When I start talking about relationships, when I start talking about things like restorative practice, when I start talking about things like trauma-informed practice, there are people who will switch off already. Because they class that as the fluffy. And so the way I don't know exactly how relevant this is, but I just want to share my personal experience of it, is that I feel like I work in this very, very staunch patriarchal world, and I can do it because I can do my Margaret Thatcher. I can put on my shoulder pads and I can bang the drum and I can go and do it. And what I've discovered, the only way for me to keep working in that world and trying to make change in it, I have to have so much support around me that is what we might call feminine.
Yes.
And I think it's only in recent years that I've realized for myself, I can't just push in that Margaret Thatcher way, the shoulder pads way. There's a fantastic woman, actually, Mary Portas. She talks about this in her book, Work Like a Woman. If you haven't come across that, that's a great book. But she talks about this, that we can take ourselves so far pushing in that way, and then there's a point, and then there's a point. And so what I've come to for me is that I have to, I feel like there's a well. So all of my menstruation groups, my business coaching groups, my meditation groups, my art groups, they're all such feminine spaces. I couldn't hold those spaces. Like, I couldn't, no, that's not me. Like, I could not. Someone once asked me if I wanted to be a yoga teacher. I was like, I couldn't be a yoga teacher, because I love getting back into that world of education and making those differences. And I love being able to straddle the two. So I'm a straddler.
But you're a bridge.
I am a big straddler, and it's exhausting. And that's why I found out, like, being in spaces like yours, that kind of supportive feminine thing, and then I very slowly bring it into the education, but I really have to change my language. I really I mean, I don't know whether I could even use the word consciousness. You know, it would be more like, I talk a lot about teaching human beings.
Yeah.
Radical concept there, Sarah. But sometimes schools forget that we're teaching human beings. Being. And I kind of go it from that sense. Now, you and I know that would be me talking about, you know, being in the present moment and connecting and that. But I have to really frame it in a different way. But I love that challenge. That
holistic seeing the child as a whole person, you know. So tell us a bit about the ways in which you are supporting schools, because I know you've written a fantastic book, and so tell us a bit about what is it that you're doing.
Just trying to think which way to start it. So essentially, I do what I just described. I straddle. So I work in mainstream schools, and in those I will support behaviour. So the way the system is currently created, twitch, there are at least 35 children a day being excluded in British schools.
Wow.
That was a pre-COVID figure. As I'm looking at it more lately, it looks to be closer to 40. And I look at that and I think, well, something's wrong with the system.
Yeah.
But clearly we need to sort out the system. And so what I'll do is there's a lot of schools and teachers who are working in mainstream, working with these young people with behaviour needs, of whom there are an increasing amount since the lockdowns. I'm sure if you're listening as a parent or carer, you'll know this anyway, but schools' behaviour issues have risen tenfold since lockdown for all the obvious mental health reasons, lack of routine reasons, lack of motivation because exams can be pulled at any second. Like, there's so many factors, and let's not talk, not even including things like poverty increasing, etc. So in the mainstream schools, I support behaviour. The average teacher has had about half a day's training on behaviour in their initial teacher training, which could have been 15 years ago.
Wow.
And yet the most teachers that I meet, they really want to support your kids. Right? They're in that job for the reason. They're not in that job for the money. They're not, some people say teachers are in it for the holidays. Yeah, but most teachers, 99% of teachers I meet, want to do well for the kids. And so many teachers, teaching assistants, pastoral staff, etc., come to me and say, but we don't know what to do with them. There's this low level disruption going on. This one keeps running out the classroom. This one keeps setting their blazer alight. All these kind of things. They're not trained. Now, for those of you who've come across SEND and special educational needs, you might recognise that as something like dyslexia or a learning difficulty, or possibly something like autism. Now, I talk about behaviour needs also being a part of that. So there's a label, a category we call SEMH. So this is young people with social, emotional, mental health issues. And they are often the kids who have perhaps experienced trauma one way or another, abuse, neglect. They have maybe mental health issues. And these young people are the people who will display the most challenging behaviour for the adults who are working with them. So I talk about SEMH is part of that special need, and they have barriers to learning. Now, the difficulty is sometimes for schools to get their head around it is that the block to learning might not be visible, because the block to learning might be they have been abused as a child, for example, let's say by a man, right? And so when they're in the classroom and a male teacher comes in, they start kicking off and they start effing and jeffing, and they'll run out of the classroom. Now, the kid is unable, this is just one very, could be millions, but this is one example, because of the experiences this child has had, this form of abuse. They can't stand there and say, actually, I'm feeling slightly uncomfortable today because once upon a time, when I was about 5 years old, I was abused by a man in my family, and now there's a male teacher here who looks a bit like him, and it's tricky. That's not
exactly, or who smells just like that person.
Exactly.
Like, I don't even know why. I'm just like,
yeah, and often the young people can't explain that. And also, caveat, neither can adults.
No,
this is not a children's thing only.
Absolutely. I mean, how hard is that for us to know, like you say, as adults, what is actually triggering us, what is going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I do in mainstream schools is I support school leaders with their approaches to supporting extreme behaviour needs across the whole school. Or I'll support teachers on what they can do in the classrooms, how they can differentiate their learning environments for young people with different needs. And again, this can be any kind of needs. It could be the Gypsy Roma traveller kid who is getting really bullied, who's experiencing racial abuse. And so when you start studying Dracula, where all of the characters who are travellers are the baddies, you start wondering why they're kicking off. Or the kid who is self-harming and then struggles with the scene in Macbeth where that you can tell I'm an English teacher.
Yeah.
struggles with the scene in Macbeth where she's out damn spot and there's blood everywhere, you know. So I will support mainstream schools with behaviour, and that's at all levels. So I'll work with midday supervisors, I'll work with the leaders looking at the strategies and the policies and the training we need to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sometimes also work with local authorities on how to create strategies and approaches that will support, you know, on a much wider scale.
Mm.
And then this is my straddly bit. I also work in what we call pupil referral units. That's PRUs,
Yeah.
and special schools for young people with SEMH, social, emotional, mental health issues. Now, these are the kind of places, these alternative provisions, where young people are sent to when they've been excluded. And over here, we have, I mean, these, for some of these kids, not all of them, but for some of them, this is they're on their way to prison kind of thing. Not everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but for some, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're lucky, it's a special school that's completely about restorative practices and approaches, in which it's all about supporting the young person with their needs so that they can thrive with education. And I am lucky enough to work in some of those schools that are incredible.
Yeah, brilliant.
And we have young people who've been excluded. And let's just pause, I'm saying that to myself, and think, how do we feel when we're excluded from something? We've literally been given the label, you are excluded.
Yeah, like you don't belong here, you know?
Exactly.
And as a parent, so I know before we came, we pressed record for this, you know, I was mentioning to you about a parent whose child has recently been excluded because they had got into a difficult situation, being kind of groomed by being groomed into I suppose antisocial activities, you know, around knives and drugs, you know, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, you know, there's me in my little bubble, you know, I know I am incredibly privileged. I know my children are massively, massively privileged.
Do they know it?
No, they don't know that. Well, they can't, and I'm glad they don't know it right now. They will later on, but right now they have no idea how privileged they are. You know, they go to a Steiner school where they get to do art and singing and all of this stuff every day, and it's all embedded in the curriculum. And they think about, you know, how they are, you know, they as internally as a human being and the spirit of the child and all of this beautiful stuff. And they're you know, their teachers know them really, really well and love them. You know, I feel like their teachers love them and are kind of in this loco parentis kind of and it's beautiful. And I wish that for every single child, you know, and every single teacher to be able to work in these beautiful ways and feel like, because people get into teaching because they want to make a difference. People get into teaching because they love children and they want to help them, and they probably got children themselves and it works out well with their holidays and all the rest of it. Yeah, there's an aspect of that, right? But people care who go into that kind of profession, you know. And like you, I've worked in years ago, so I used to do theatre work and go in and do workshops and things, and I've worked in you know, well, it wasn't called exclusion then, it was a little while ago, but I've worked in, you know, prisons for young people and things like this. And yeah, it's so important to have, because like you say, the path is not great for these kids, you know. It is like the predictable future is probably prison at some point if a change doesn't happen for them. So I think it's amazing that you're doing the work with these people who are doing this amazing work, restorative work.
I think you hit on something there that I come across all the time. Most teachers that I work with really want to do the best by your children, and yet the system is not allowing them to. And I think because it's a highly stressful job, And the current government also decided in, I think it was 2014, forgive me if that's wrong, to make it performance related pay, which means how your kids in your class doing their exams affects your pay, affects if you can pay your mortgage. And so the pressure is pushing and pushing and pushing at the same time as we're having cuts, at the same time as we're not having counsellor support, we're not having social worker support. The teachers are being asked to be so many different roles that we're not trained for as well. And what ends up happening, and I meet some of the best, most wonderful teachers, and this still happens, it happened to me definitely, is the rhetoric is so much on the data, the results, the data, the results. You've got 33 in a class. If you're something like a secondary, let's say geography teacher or an art teacher, you'll teach over 200 kids a week. As an English teacher, we have them for a few more hours, so that I think I was 150 or something. But yeah, those classes where you only go once a week for geography, so that geography teacher will perhaps have 4 year 7 classes, that kind of thing. Over 200 kids a week. And I think that's outside of the scale of amount of people we've got capacity for, isn't it? Like 100?
To hold
that energy.
So
is it a wonder that I remember in my trainee year, I sat in parents' evening. We had a year 8's parents' evening. It was something like 5 weeks into the term, and I had an Ella, an Ellie, an Eve, and an Eva in the same class, all white girls with long blonde hair. And I don't to this day know if I spoke about the right kid to the right parent, because because I was teaching 150 kids in a week. I'd known them for 5 weeks. So this class, I think I'd seen for about a total of maybe 6 hours with 34 in that class. So it's like, no matter how
it's a lot of humans to hold in your heart.
It exactly. Yes,
Isn't
exactly.
it?
So what a lot of my work with teachers is, and teaching assistants and the teaching team, is helping them. And I mean, I'm a bit of a maverick too, but is helping them say, actually, no, you're the one who knows your class. Most teachers 9 times out of 10 know what to do with a kid behaviourally. And I find, and this, I bet you come across this stuff in your parenting, that the moments it goes wrong is when you go against what you know is true.
Yes. And you don't trust yourself when you don't. Exactly.
And this is what I see up and down the country, is teachers go, because like this one teacher actually recently even said to me, oh, this kid I've got, he's really kind of hyperactive and really on top of it, and I keep trying to punish him and he's not listening. He reminds me, and this was really interesting, he reminds me of my puppy. And I said, okay, how do you support your puppy? And she said, oh, well, I love my puppy and I calm him down and I sit and I stroke him. I said, okay, good. What do you do with the kid? Well, I have to tell him off because we've got this behaviour policy and and I was like, okay, can you see the difference there? Which one's most effective? Now I'm being really careful. Comparing children to dogs, it's not. I'm comparing her approach, right?
Yes.
But my point is, her gut knew what this kid needed because she had a similar pattern with the dog, and yet because of behaviour policies, Ofsted, systems, data, management, observations, workload, all the rest of it, a lot of people are going against their human instincts. And a big question I get asked a lot is around zero tolerance. Do you believe in zero tolerance? It's an abstract concept, but anyway.
People will have different definitions of what zero tolerance even is, won't they?
So I worked with this fantastic man, David Gumbrell. He wrote the book around resilience in education. A lovely man. He'd been a head teacher for years and now working in teacher training, which is great. And he talked to me about something that I'd always done, but he labelled it for me. He called it live teaching. And it's that thing of saying, well, it's when a school turns to me and says, but we need to have rules or else there'll be chaos. And I say, yeah, absolutely. We need guidelines, whether you call them rules or whatever. Okay. Yes, you need guidelines and it's that and, isn't it? And I have to trademark mine and Sarah's coach, Susie Ashworth. I feel like she owns and now.
Yes.
It's like, yes, we need rules. And
I think she might have got it from Melanie, maybe.
From someone
anyway
else. Okay.
We'll see.
But the point is, so the example I often give, and it's in my book, is Okay, so let's say you've got a rule, no talking during the register, right? Apart from when you're answering, because there's always one smarty pants.
Yes.
So no talking during the register, that's my rule. Okay, great. It's a good rule to have. It kind of cleanses the start of the lesson. It lets everyone have a moment of reflection, a transition from the last class to this class. You know, it's arguably a very useful guideline boundary, right? And then one day, Subotka gets a nosebleed and Sarah grabs a tissue for her and gives it to her. Now they're talking and it's silence during the register. And if I'm being zero tolerance, I need to punish Subotka for having a nosebleed and Sarah for like giving her a tissue. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
To me, that's where zero tolerance is absolutely ridiculous, because it's like, well, hang on a minute. Well, firstly, how can I punish a kid for having a nosebleed and reacting to it? I think it's quite a good thing that we react to blood. That's probably a kind of general human useful mechanism.
Yeah.
Also, Sarah's being kind. She's helping her friend.
Yeah.
I'm like, but the zero tolerance behaviour policy might tell me that anybody talking during the register, they have to have whatever it is, lines, detention, blah, 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 behaviour points. And this is what David Gumbrell was talking about in live teaching. And this is what I do with schools. I help.
It's that discernment, isn't it?
Yes,
really.
Yes.
You know.
But we can only do that, of course, and this is the tricky bananas bit, which is where chapter 1 of my book starts. It can only happen if we've looked after ourselves first.
Oh, do you know, there's so much crossover here, you know, because it's the same with parents, you know. You've got to look after yourself. You've got to fill up your cup to be able to hold space for your child, you know, to be able to, to deal with the stuff that is going to be happening during the day, you know, whether you're a parent or a teacher, you know.
Exactly.
So that's huge, isn't it?
I share on Twitter quite a lot. I'm on Twitter at Adele Bates Z, and I share these hashtag insults of the week of all the fun and games that children say to me, and people join in, which is lovely. And also I share stories, and one of them was I'd come in after lunch and I was with this class and I'd been working with them for 2 years. It was GCSE, year 11. And I kind of just started the register, did it all. And then this one kid turned to me and went, "Miss, you're snappier than usual." Like, we had a good relationship, it was okay. And I was like, "Yeah, well, doesn't matter, get on." And he went, why are you being so snappy? Why are you being so grumpy? And I said, "Oh, I had a club and I didn't eat my lunch." And he said, "Miss, eat your lunch." And I said, "I can't." I said, "We've been told we're not supposed to eat in front of the children." Anyway, again, some kind of weird arbitrary rule school had.
So when are you going to eat if you've got a club that you have to do, or you have to be on duty during lunchtime? When are you going to eat?
Exactly. Anyway. And I said, "I'm not supposed to eat in front of you. It's the rule." And he just looked at me and went, "Miss, can you please eat your lunch?" And it was just beautiful, because in that moment he had the emotional intelligence. And again, this is one of my inverted commas nurture groups. So these are low ability kids with behaviour needs. But he had the emotional intelligence, and often young people who have SEMH or behaviour needs do, because they, not all the time, but have often been in situations where they really have to manage adults' emotions. It could mean very dangerous things. But he had the emotional intelligence and the audacity to tell me to eat my lunch, because he could see that if I didn't eat my lunch, the next 2-hour double period of his life, I'd be nagging at him. And I absolutely would be. If I haven't eaten lunch, if I haven't slept, if I haven't
You
been
were
in nature,
hangry, weren't you?
I was hangry. Then I am going to escalate those behaviour issues more. And I think this is something that I'm really advocating a lot in schools at the moment. That's like, a lot of schools come to me and say, "Can you help our staff de-escalate behaviour situations?" And when I watch them, when I observe, unfortunately 9 times out of 10 it's the adults who are escalating, because they're trying to be stricter. "You've got a C1 now, and now you've got a C1 because you shouted at me, and now you've tipped your desk over, and so now it's a C2, and now it's a C2. You are in a lot of trouble." Whoa. It's like, there's only one way you can go there, and it's up and out. And so I'm going to bring my book in now, because you asked me a
Yes,
while ago.
do.
So
And
this is where the book came in, because in this straddling that I do, I see a lot of fantastic practice happening in alternative provisions in the special schools, because with these type of kids, if you don't differentiate the environment or the relationships or build that trust, they're literally out the window. No exaggeration, no metaphor there.
Yeah.
I have followed many a child out to the window. So you really know if you're doing it. Whereas in mainstream, there are a certain number of kids who'll just sit there and comply and be like, okay, yeah. I mean, whether they're learning anything is a different question. But anyway, so I've seen some fantastic practice in these alternative provisions. And I just feel like as we have an increasing amount of young people who are on the verge of exclusion, how about radical idea, we share the practice. So my book is a how-to for teaching staff and schools to support young people with behaviour needs. It is called Miss I Don't Give a Shit: Engaging with Challenging Behaviour in Schools. And essentially it goes through 8 or 9 different chapters on different areas around behaviour. In each one of those, we'll look at a little piece of theory and then look at how does that work actually with the kids in the classroom. There's lots of examples and anecdotes in that way.
What a great resource.
And at the end of each chapter, I interview an expert on that topic. And when I say expert, I'm not necessarily talking about what for example social media or whatever says as expert, but we have care experienced adults in there, which was really important for me because there's a huge crossover in kids who are in care and behaviour needs. So there's an interview at the end of every chapter, and then also we have an action box, which is what can you do next lesson, next week, and long term around this topic. So a school or an individual adult can pick this up and go, okay, that chapter was great. What can I do like in 20 minutes when my lesson starts? But also, what can I do to build this up next week? And what can I do to support this? Because obviously these things shift when we work on them long term. I'm sure that's a crossover with you as well.
Completely. You know, we talked a bit before we came on, didn't we, about that consistency being huge, you know, doing things long enough for them to work, knowing what to do and doing it long enough for it to work. Yes, you know, exactly. Is a huge, really. Yeah.
And then finally, at the end of the book, the final chapter is a troubleshooting chapter where I had to fight with my publisher for this. It's quite funny. It's things like, they keep walking out of my classroom. What do I do? A pupil screams in my class for a reaction. What do I do? And my publisher wanted to take out all the ahs. And I was like, no, that's how you feel when it happens. It needs to be there. And in that chapter, you get like a really quick, it's like a quick fire troubleshooting chapter, and then links to all the different chapters you can refer back to. So I'm so pleased. I mean, the book has been selling really well. I've been told that I've sold more in 6 months than most first-time educators sell in a year.
Amazing! Congratulations!
Thank you. Schools are buying it on bulk, and then you can get a discount as well. But what's really exciting is the amount of people who are coming to me saying, this makes complete sense. I could have written this book. And I feel that as a massive compliment, because a lot of the work, and I wonder if this is similar for you, a lot of the texts that I read about around behaviour in education are very, I can never remember this word, pathologized. It's very theory. You got that sense. And it was so important for me that this book was in those rooms, those sweaty mobiles with year 6, when the hormones have started and they've started smelling, and it's the summer but the heating's on because it got stuck and the caretaker can't fix it. Like it's in that world, because it's in those moments when the behavior goes. Yes. And so it's that bridge space that I often find myself in, is that I really wanted to mish together, yes, the theory, and this is how it works in practice.
The practical is massive, isn't it?
And absolutely, yeah.
is huge, and that's what people need. So to finish up, we have gone a bit longer than we'd said.
We kind of said we might, didn't we?
We knew it was going to happen, didn't we? Let's face it. But what I was going to ask you is, what's one tip that you can give people on this podcast that you think, oh, if I could only give them one tip, what would it be?
Can you give me a topic area?
Okay, so a tip around.
So you know what, Sarah, that we haven't really spoken about that I think might be useful for your audience is how as a parent or carer you communicate with schools.
Oh,
should we share a little bit about that?
Yes,
maybe?
Because you know what, the reason I was thinking about a tip, I was thinking there was something before we pressed record that we felt was really important, and it is that.
Okay,
so this is the tip around communicating with schools. Okay. So well, remember, between us we got there.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the tip, it might have several
tips. It may not be the tip, but it's something that they just won't necessarily know,
yes, absolutely. So when I work with parents or carers, it tends to be via the school, and I've worked with a lot of adoptive parents, and I worked particularly with parents and carers around lockdown of how to support education at home. That was fun times, wasn't it? Often what I share with parents and carers is around how to successfully communicate with your school, because there are so many parents and carers who have young people who are displaying behaviour needs for whatever reason and are clashing with the school. And if we're not careful, we can get in a tit for tat for the school, and it just doesn't help the kids. I mean, I imagine there's something similar about when parents or carers have differing opinions of how to bring up a kid.
Absolutely. You know, there'll be crossover. You know, I work with parents in blended families, and you know, they're having to communicate with each other and communicate with school and work out how to get the best for their child. And
so one of my absolute top tips with communicating with a school, if you don't know about schools, if the last time you kind of knew about schools was when you were there, is to just before you send that really angry email to the whole department or the whole school, if you possibly can, just have a think about these few things. So I have seen the most success happen when you are able to connect with, whether it's a particular teacher, the SENCO, the key worker, form a relationship with one, possibly two members of staff. I can tell you right now, when I'm teaching 200 kids a week and an email is sent from a parent or carer to everybody in the English department or everybody in year 7 or whatever it is, nobody replies because nobody thinks it's for them. So really avoid blanket emails for a start. So it's about finding that person who gets your kid. And it might be a teaching assistant, it might be a key worker, whoever it is. Form the relationship with them, and I'm sure Sarah's work crosses over into this, but form the communication and the relationship with them. The ideal is that school and home are singing from the same song sheet, especially for kids with behaviour needs, or SEMH or mental health issues or neurodiversity or so many things. I'm sure I've missed them out there, but that consistency and routine is so important. If the kids feel that school and home are fighting, guess what the kids get to do? They get to play one off against the other, and we see it, and it doesn't help the kids' education. This is always my focus. Is this helping the kids' education? Is this helping the kids' education?
And that's a great question to ask yourself, isn't it? Because you know, those heightened emotions. And I'm going to just add in, I love what you're saying, and you know, this is something I realize I do. But you know, if I've got to write an email and I've got a lot of emotion in it, like write it, but don't send it. Don't write it on the email, write it on a document or on a piece of paper, whatever. Write it, and then you'll need to rewrite it, like hone it down so that but to get your initial thoughts out. But I think a lot of people probably send those initial thoughts.
And think of it from the teacher's point of view. We're teaching a 6-period day. We might have 20 minutes lunch if we're not running a club. We might have a 10-minute break somewhere else. When do we check our emails? I'll tell you when we check our emails. When your kids are getting on with their work. So if we open, because this is the moments we get, so if we open an email that's full of passion and fury and everything, we're human too, we can't respond to that effectively. Because actually we need to be with your kids as much as we can. And unfortunately, because of the way the system is, often we're checking emails during lessons because that's the only time we have. So it is, I think that's such a good tip, Sarah. So whereas if you have that one or two people who you know gets your kid, who you know can advocate, then actually asking them for a meeting to go over some points is going to be far more effective, because then what you do is you get an advocate. And then you get an advocate fighting on behalf of your kid within the school, and that person will know the school system, whereas you might not. And it is all about, I think we've found the top tip. It's all about constantly asking yourself, does this help my kid's education? Because I might not like Mrs. Singh or the way she is with my kid, and she might just get my hackles up, and there might just be a big personality clash between me and Mrs. Singh. But is me arguing with her going to help my kids' education? And it's hard to do. It's like the adult thing to do.
It is. It's that being a grown-up.
And the great thing is, though, is as and I've just thought of a resource I can share about this actually. As we form positive relationships with that one or two advocates, then we build trust. And then actually, when I, as a parent or carer, am struggling to get them out of bed and get them to school, I can go to the school and say, I need help. Rather than, well, school isn't doing something because the kid doesn't want to be there, so you must be doing something wrong at school. And you can see, although that's my heart and that's my hurt, and maybe that's my feeling of shame, that's my feeling of all those things, does it help my kids' education? Not really. What helps the kids' education is for the adults to work together to find out where the issues are, how it can be supported, and how we can work through it. So I think,
do you know, I'm so excited that we've connected in this way, and such great tips there for parents. And I've just been thinking, as you've been talking about, you very much work with the schools and the teachers and what have you, and I don't really work with those. And it's so interesting. What I can see is, there'll be stuff that you help the teachers with that is going to help parents, and there's stuff that I help parents with that I have then teachers going, I've used this at work, I've used this, it's helped me be better at relating with my class or with my and so it's just such beautiful crossover in supporting from both sides,
absolutely,
so we can all be singing from the same hymn sheet.
It's interesting how many parents and carers have actually contacted me saying they've read my book, because you are not my target audience. But so many people have, and then they said, and then I passed it to my school. And brilliant. I think that, but it also helps parents and carers understand what school is like, because it isn't like it was when you were there. And we naturally do this whenever we think about something that's happened in our past, we're taking all our baggage with it. So when I think of school, I have a load of things that, if I'm not careful, I will take into my child's education. But actually what's more useful is to give them a blank slate so that they can explore what school means for them. So I also have a resource. This is specifically for people who have either teenagers or tweens. Is that what we call them nowadays?
Yeah, we call them tweens.
Yes, I have a 3-part masterclass. You can find that in my shop on my website, and it's all about the teenage brain. And so the teenage brain starts developing when we're actually 8 years old, around that time, and it goes all the way through to when we're 24. I'm not going to go into all of it now, but if we know more about how the brain works at that time, then it's miraculous. But then we get to support them more effectively.
I mean, it's huge, isn't it? And this is one of the things that's talked about in standard education, is this 9-year change that happens.
Yes, exactly.
There's this which is the start of all of that change, and there's a big shift. And so I am the parent of, I didn't plan this very well because I didn't know before I had children. Nobody tells you this, do they? So I have a 9-year-old The daughter who's just turned 9, so she's going into this whole 9-year change. And I have a 13-year-old. A daughter who's turned 13 a few months ago. So yeah,
yay!
I planned that really well, didn't I?
Yeah. It's funny when people say to me, I have teenagers, and it's like, yeah, but I gave birth to a baby. So in that resource, it's that is for parents and carers and anybody who works with teenagers. So I've had social workers use it, I've had parents and carers and teachers use it, and it's a 3-part masterclass all about how we communicate specifically with teenagers, how we can differentiate our environments for them, how we can help them feel in this time when they're completely exploring their identity and the world, and what does it mean like not to be with my primary caregiver anymore, rah, which is perfectly healthy, by the way.
Yeah,
how we can particularly as the primary caregiver, how we can support that. So that's also available. My website is adelebateseducation.co.uk.
perfect. And for anybody listening, all the links
that
we've mentioned are going to be underneath the podcast. Okay, so if you just scroll down, then you can click on the links and get to Adele's site and the resources she's mentioned. So they will all be there. So perfect. Adele, thank you so much. We need to finish up now, and I really hope you have got some real nuggets and some inspiration from this today.
And let us know as well.
Yeah, let us know. We'd love to
know which
hear
ones
from
land.
you.
I'm over on Twitter at Adele Bates Z. So if you've listened to this and you've got, oh, hang on, that thing, then do come over and let me know.
Yay! Thank you so much. Amazing to have you on. And
thank you, Sarah.
Yay! Thank you so much, everyone.